Adversity Psychologist Podcast. I'm Dr. Tara Quinn, and today I'm really excited. So all the way across the other side of the world, we have the wonderful Maggie Walters. I'm going to let her introduce herself because she's also someone who knows two other previous guests, my kind of Australian crew. So good morning or good evening to you. Do you want to say hello and tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself?
Good day from down under. That's probably the best way to
fantastic.
say it.
Love that.
I'm Maggie Walters. I am an author. I've just debuted my memoir, Split, A Life Shared, Living with Multiple Personality Disorder. And I live in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. It's God's country here. It's just glorious. And I love it. I love my writing friends. I love my life here and love talking about what it means to deal with mental health issues.
And I'm so glad to have you on. So you are on this podcast because you know two other guests of mine, Mark Berridge, but you also know another guest of mine, Sarah. So I would like you to just tell us a little bit about what made you reach out and come on. What is your story? What is it you would like to share with us today?
Wow, you're going to dive deep straight up.
I am.
I think for me, I see my book as a platform and a tool from which to be able to say, hey, look at me. I am not the stereotype of what the public likes, or the media likes to portray of, the hype and the craziness that goes along with someone who lives with multiple personality disorder. Yes. I'm a mother of 3 children. I love to go out and have a coffee with friends. I do grocery shopping. Nobody would know I'm multiple if I didn't decide to tell them about it. And I guess I just kind of figure if I can be really, sometimes excruciatingly, I have to say, honest about who I am as a person and what goes on in my head. If I can be honest about that, then that's going to help other people realize, hey, okay, she's actually fairly normal. And maybe I need to translate that to how other people are with other complex medical issues. And let's just be kinder to each other. That's really the big kick I'm on, being kinder to each other.
Yeah. So one of the things that interests me, so I've been a psychologist over 20 years. We'll kind of just stop there. Otherwise people will think I'm a dinosaur. So when I first started my training, we used to use a diagnostic manual that would help us to look at different presentations. There is different thinking in current day around the use of diagnostics and labels. So let's dive into that. So what I think is really important with everybody that I work with, everybody that I talk to is, how do you want to be identified? What do you think about diagnostics? But also the fact that with multiple personality disorder, there is a new kind of terminology, isn't there? And how you feel about that, how you like to identify.
Okay, so it does not bother me to be known as someone who's multiple. I guess the thing is, and that's one of the big challenges, is it's very easy for someone who's multiple to hide who they are. And we pretend a lot. So people wouldn't necessarily, unless I'm triggered or I flip or something like that, which happens very rarely for me. Right. No one's really going to know. So it's really about a choice of me trusting and allowing someone inside my life. And I know it's who I am. I've had people go, well, would you rather just be just you in your head? And I'm going, I can't, I'm 63 and I've been this way for as long as I can remember. And I just cannot imagine being quiet in my head. It's just, I'm just used to the voices. They're nattering at me now as we're talking and I'm just going, it's just something that I'm really used to. As far as the name, so when I was diagnosed, it was called multiple personality disorder. Yeah. In 1994, I think it was, they changed it to dissociative identity disorder. And I just never understood why. And it wasn't until I was actually doing a talk earlier this week, and there was a retired ED nurse who came, and we were having this conversation about how the medical community really doesn't have the tools necessary to be able to help out people in an ED unit or something like that, and to understand what their needs are. They just get categorized as crazy and sent off to the loony bin. for lack of a better word. That's a horrible way to say it, but it's
really shaming, isn't it?
It's horrible.
Yeah.
And what she said to me, and I thought this was really interesting because I never understood why they changed the name. She said that when it became dissociative identity disorder, for her, putting that dissociation label at the front helped her to realize that this was a person who wasn't bipolar, who wasn't on drugs or anything like that. They were dissociating. And I went, that's the first time that's actually ever made sense to me. And I really liked hearing that. That actually made sense. I still call it MPD because to me, it just rolls off the tongue easy for me. But it makes sense now. It makes sense.
Yeah. And for people listening, because some people may not be familiar with any of these concepts. When we're talking about dissociating, is there a way that you explain that to people who may not be familiar with what that concept is even?
So for me, as someone with MPD, what happens as an adult now, I'm safe. And my alters, my girls in my head know that we're safe. But there are still things that happen from time to time that will cause a trigger for me.
Right.
But sorry, see, there you go. I've kind of lost the question.
It's like, so people might not be familiar with the term.
Yeah. Okay.
So in terms of what that is.
Well, okay. So to boil it down in a nutshell, there's really three things that need to happen for someone to become a multiple. First of all, it only happens to children because a child's mind is still it's very plastic and it's malleable and it's not rigid like our older brains are, and they can think creatively about how to deal with difficult situations. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there's something called betrayal trauma, where the trauma that they experience comes from someone who's very close to them. It's usually a parent, but it'll be someone who's very intimate to the family and that they should be able to trust. Yeah. Just unconditionally be able to trust. And then the third aspect of that is that they, whether it's literal or perceived, that the child feels like they can't get out of that circumstance. So ergo, in their minds, they go away and somebody else has to come out and take over. For me, I had an incident happen when I was 3 years old where I went away and I had my internal alter named Annie who came out, and she basically lived and managed our entire childhood. All the other alters that came out and had to deal with stuff, she dealt with all of that and then grew into a young adult and really had problems and struggles getting along with people and anger management and all relationship stuff and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
And finally went to see a therapist who, unbeknownst to her, happened to have a specialty in MPD. Right. And after about 5 years, and you would appreciate this as a psychologist, your client has to trust you. Yeah. And if they don't trust you, absolutely. And so it took about 5 years for her to trust him. And they finally started discovering abuse and alters and things like that so that she could actually come to terms with who she was. And then I came back later in life, but that's a whole nother story.
So kind of there's a role, isn't there, of kind of the brain protecting us and helping. And I guess as well, that role of compassion. So I was kind of saying just before we hit record that there is a movement now. There are certain people who really are kind of anti-diagnostics or labels, and a big kind of movement. I, as a psychologist, I'm in the middle. So I always ask the people I work with, what is useful? Because for some people it's useful to have a framework, to have a reference to work from. A lot of therapeutic interventions come from research around those references. But there are some people that I work with who do not want to do that. And I always think the starting point should be with the person. So it's interesting, in terms of you've shared, and thank you, that, for you, using the concept of multiple personality disorder is helpful. It's a way for you to then communicate that to other people.
I've got quite a few adult friends who have been diagnosed on the spectrum as adults. Yeah. And for them, it's been very freeing. Yeah. It doesn't put them in a box. It actually helps them go, wow, okay, so not everybody sees the world the way I do. And it's okay because we're all different. And it's absolutely okay.
Yeah. Now, one of the wonderful things about you is that you have, because sometimes people have a story, they might begin to maybe verbalize that with close people, but you have gone a step further and you've actually written a memoir. And it takes a lot, doesn't it, to write a personal journey down. And one of the things that we want to focus on today is helping other people, because I absolutely love the more and more I meet people with lived experience sharing and really sharing some, kind of tricky stuff. What is it? What made you put pen to paper? What made you say, I need to share my experience with the world?
I think that both for my primary alter, Annie, and I, writing has always been a very important way of expressing ourselves. Okay. And I went back through some old journals that she used to keep, and I found a part where she actually talked about how she hoped that her experiences and the things that happened to her could one day help others. Now, that got shelved as she started trying to wrestle with life and, everything moves on. But I think that's kind of come full circle now. Wow. And now that we've actually been able to get this book out there, and it's like having the opportunity, and, I get approached by people who have DID, and they, are owning who they are. And for me to be honest about who I am and my struggles, there's great triumphs, but there's also great struggles. Yeah, it really encourages other people. Yeah, and if it can encourage other people, then then everything that I went through as a child is worthwhile, in the sense that there's a purpose, because other people can be encouraged and helped by it. Even people who aren't MPD but don't understand, and they've got relationships with people who might be MPD, it helps them understand so that they can learn how to deal with other people.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So it's not just because it might be informing people who've never heard of these concepts, as say, it might be supporting someone. And I always think there aren't enough tools out there. One of my co-author on my book wrote a book on supporting people with depression, because quite often people don't think about the person who might be supporting, or the best way to do that, but also to help you and to know what you need, what's helpful and what's not helpful when people are supporting you and maintaining your autonomy. But I also love the fact that you just said there as well, that it's not about sharing the upside, and because sometimes people can get kind of sucked into making light of everything, or showing how they have coped with struggles, but you need to talk about the actual struggles. And so, that there is a spiky profile, that they're up days, down days. Is that something you're comfortable talking about? So when you kind of look at how you live your day-to-day life now, are there better days than others?
Absolutely.
What kind of support do you need and not need during those times?
If I'm having a really bad day, I'll go and binge watch West Wing. Just give me a couple episodes and I'll feel like that sounds horrible. But I'm very fortunate. I've got a few people who are very close to me who are my inner circle. And I can just call them and just say, I am falling apart. And can we just go have a coffee? And I don't even necessarily have to talk about what's going on, because,
that's a good point.
It's more about just the companionship, because there are things that happened in my life and that I struggle with that don't need to be anywhere except a therapist's office. And that's the other thing that I'm really fortunate. The guy that I've been seeing, and in my book, I've had 4 therapists, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, because I call them shrink 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I have been encouraged by a few people to say, no, you actually need to give them names because it makes them more real. And I wanted to not give them names because I wanted people to understand that that my therapists have a place in my life, which is in an office with a door shut, where I can be absolutely transparent, and I can leave that behind when I walk out that door. So I didn't want them to have a name because I didn't want them to be quite real. But needless to say, shrink number 4, he's in my book, and he's there for me. I see him every week, barring, the odd holiday for him and me running away and doing other things as well. But he knows we live in regional New South Wales, and I'm really fortunate that he has actually somebody who understands MPD. And so that's really important. And having that support and not being alone as you're walking through this stuff.
Yes.
For the longest time, when I moved to Australia, and my husband's an Australian, I thought, I can just leave this MPD behind. I'm going to pretend it's not who I am. We're just going to start fresh, and it's not going to be an issue. That was the most stupid thing I could have ever done, because it follows you. You can't get away from it. If it's unresolved trauma, it's going to follow you wherever you go. And I really tried to pretend that I wasn't MPD, so I didn't tell anybody. My partner knew. I made sure that he understood even before we got married that this is who I am, and you're going to have to wrestle with this. But as I moved here, I went, I don't have to tell anybody that I'm MPD. And that actually imploded, because I felt so alone, and I felt so ashamed of who I was as a person that I couldn't tell anybody. And it actually really ramped up the cycle of my alters and their need to be heard and to understand the triggers that they were experiencing being in a new country, completely on the other side of the world, and all that sort of stuff. So that was really silly for me to think that I could do it alone, because I couldn't. You've got to have help. We live in community. We need each other.
And also being compassionate with that initial thinking around, I can do this, or I need to do this. Because I imagine that must be hard as well. Because there can be sometimes a bit of vulnerability, can't there, sitting with the, I want help, can I ask for it? Sometimes there can be shame, guilt, all sorts of stuff kind of tied up with that.
When I was diagnosed in the mid-1980s. And it was an era when it was still seen as really a psychosis.
Right.
And like the guy who wrote the foreword for my book, he said, it's not a mental illness. He said, it's actually a creative coping mechanism for dealing with some of the worst trauma that a person can go through. It's actually the ultimate creative tool. And that was really freeing. But back in the 1980s, that wasn't thought of that way. So I had people call me psychotic. I even was here doing a talk down near Sydney, and I had a guy was trying to really push my buttons at a talk I was doing about, it's still a psychosis. It's still in the DSM-5, and, on and on and on. And I was like, I finally had the guy who was actually doing the conversation with me. He actually moved him on, but it's really hard when... Go ahead.
I was like, it's just so interesting, isn't it? Again, that you have people that are trying to put their take on it. They're trying to put you in a box, or as a psychologist, it's just interesting what the function is behind that behavior. Why do that?
Well, and I have to recognize that that's his issue. This guy in particular, I had known of who he was and what some of his history was, and he needed to try and make himself look good. And I've now, anytime I'm given an opportunity to, I talk about how even today we're trying to change the narrative around mental health, and especially complex mental health.
Yes.
But there are still people, and there's more than I think any of us really want to admit, that just need to put people in boxes and shame other people so that they can feel better about themselves.
Absolutely right. It's the shame element in addition to that.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
And I guess it's what, when you're trying to navigate stuff, is how does that add to the load that we already have trying to navigate life when you've got people trying to push you in a box and shame you? And I'm just wondering whether that did that form part of you going, I need to put pen to paper, I need to help people to really understand.
I don't think I was aware of that early on. It's interesting now that the book is out there, and I've started talking about it. I feel like I'm beginning to understand my narrative much better. My mentor, who actually helped me, did a developmental edit of the book with me and all this sort of stuff. She kept saying to me, you need to dive deeper into who you are as a person. Right. She was an social worker who'd had some experience with MPD. And she said, you need to really just dig deep. And so I really talk about what's going on in my head a lot in the book. especially as an adult, and coming to terms with it and how I viewed the people around me. And that's made a huge difference in me going, okay, so now it's all out there. What am I going to do with this? And I'm just gradually, I think I'm going through a bit of a metamorphosis, really, is probably the honest way to put it, in regards to, first of all, I wanted to share this book because I wanted other people who had DID or any sort of dissociative thing or a complex mental health issue to feel like there was a place where they could go and that they can get help, and they need it because they deserve it.
There's hope there.
Absolutely. But now I'm starting to refine it, because one of the questions I get a lot is, have you forgiven your parents?
Right.
And I know enough to know that forgiveness is not something that every trauma survivor needs to deal with. They've got to do what works for them. For me, forgiveness is more, and I was talking about it the other week with someone. I said, there's a couple of ways to look at this. And for me, forgiveness, and this is why I want to talk to survivors, and I want to share this because it's actually really freeing. For me, the best form of revenge / forgiveness, I don't know if you want to put it in that, just working through it all, is I've raised 3 pretty ordinary kids. They're all 3 adopted, but they're pretty ordinary kids, and they're wonderful, and they're gorgeous, and I love them to death, and they're rat bags and all of that sort of stuff.
Parenting is one of the hardest jobs in the world, right?
Oh, goodness gracious. It's just, it's
ups and downs and everything in between.
Absolutely. But the other thing is how we as survivors, we need to forgive ourselves, because there are things that we did to survive that we feel, it's that shame thing again. We feel so much shame about. And if I can forgive myself for some of the things, whether it's me or my alters have done in order just to survive, that goes a long way. So forgiveness is another one of those things that I'm just really starting to key in on. But it's about how survivors need to work it out, and what does forgiveness mean for them,
Which I think, I love these concepts. It's not just your kind of rote learn, here's what to look out for, here's some coping strategies, the kind of rote learn, do this, do that. Part of the journey is learning and being open and curious about your experience, isn't it?
Yeah,
to absolutely. Make sense of it where you can. But also what I also love is having the boundaries to go, what do I need to think about? What don't I? What stays in my therapist's office? I really love that.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that for 25 years, and I love that you have that relationship and are okay with what needs to stay there. It's a wonderful level of autonomy as well, isn't it?
It's not fair, your support circle. For those of us who are fortunate enough, because I know there's a lot of people who don't necessarily have the support circles that they need.
Yes. Yeah.
But for me, it's like my support circle doesn't need to be burdened with being my psychologist. Yeah. That's not their job. Their job is to just be my friend, remind me how much they love me. And I can show them how much they love them too, because we're all in this together. And it's a big deal. It's really important.
Is it all right to ask as well? So sometimes, when we're kind of looking at autonomy, is it, because, there might be a part of us that's being compassionate and saying, what do I want my friends and family to hold, and what don't I? But also what you need, because you might need your therapist for certain things, and actually for your friends, even if they're able to hold stuff or want to, that might not be, does that make sense? That might not be what you want. Actually, what I want is someone to sit and talk about everyday stuff with, to just spend time with, as you say, not necessarily verbalizing things.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's something I'm still struggling with.
Yeah.
I think very early on with these 3 women that I'm thinking of, I had to, and they had to come to terms with it as well. Yeah. I don't talk about my MPD stuff with them much. Yeah. I talk about the outworkings of it. There have been a couple of times when they have, whether they wanted to or not, have been witness to an alter who's come out because they're feeling particularly threatened in a situation. Yeah. But that's not, dealing with my alters is not their job. And they've had to wrestle with that a bit too. And they've also come back to me and said, do you remember that day when we did that thing and you just really lost it? was that? And I'm like, yeah, it was. I'm sorry. And then we move on. And that's it. It's like, it's not a big deal. So the shame is gone.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
You know, it's just part of my life. You know, I did something dumb and I have to own it whether I want to or not.
That kind of, the word validation came to mind for me then. That it kind of wasn't minimized or shamed or, and sometimes, you know, as human beings, you know, if you don't have a therapy background, particularly as well, we can sometimes get very stuck in that we need to problem solve with our friends and our family, and sometimes that's not what's needed. It's just about holding space and being open and curious and going, what was that happened when we were out. And I love the fact that, because sometimes a little bit of humor can help you separate from the intensity of a situation, to be able to just go, actually, that was a thing and it happened. But actually, how helpful is it sometimes to really deconstruct stuff? I think as a psychologist, sometimes we don't need to do that. It's just about being made to feel safe and validated and not shamed. And having more, just conversations like this. I feel like I say it so often, but you know, I've almost got to the point where I think, can I say normalizing conversations anymore? People are just going to go, she keeps saying that, but it is, you know, when I use the word normalize, that it's not just this tokenistic. We had obviously World Mental Health Day yesterday as we were recording this podcast. I love that, but I also do struggle with that. It's a day to talk about it, and then how many people are going to talk about it today and the next day and the next day? Is
every day needs to be Mental Health Awareness Day.
Absolutely, every day. And those kind of just beginning to have, and these tricky, sometimes awkward, cringy conversations. You know, how are you? What are you experiencing? If you're asking someone how they are, you do also need to be able to hold space for that reply.
Absolutely,
that's what's needed for people to feel safe.
And I think that's what scares people.
Yes, that's a really good point.
When people are struggling, they're not necessarily looking for someone to give them answers. They just want someone to sit in the room with them, you know, and just to be there and go, this is another human being who cares about me. Take a few deep breaths and let's see where we can go from here.
I love really that. Important. Just what can I do in this moment right now? And sometimes it might be a tiny thing, it might be a bigger thing on other days. And
I think that's what scares people off from actually really giving support, is going, I'm not a psychologist. I can't give the answers. And it's like, what you provide is so much more than what a psychologist can do, because you're with me in the real world. You know, when I'm ticked off at this or angry at that, it's like, you're my friend. And you know,
absolutely. I love the fact you said, because sometimes I do feel, you know, as a kind of mental health professionals or well-being professionals, sometimes you can almost be put on this pedestal in terms of, you know, you're going to be the magic person to fix all this, which I really don't think is a helpful construct. But at the same time as well, that can really minimize the rest of the support system as well. And it's kind of an intricate thing, isn't it? It all works together. And I think that's really important. But also, I guess what's lovely about you putting pen to paper, one of the things you said just before we started, you know, your book is about helping others, that from what you've been through, you want to help others, and that includes people themselves who've been through it, but also those that are supporting them. Or there may be someone today who doesn't ever or never heard of these constructs before, doesn't know anyone, but that information might help them even just begin to start a general conversation about mental health with someone else.
Exactly right.
We can reach a lot of people.
I did a talk recently where I had two ladies who were there. The first one, she blew my heart away, because I was like, you are so brave. So when I talk about those three things, you know, the betrayal trauma, the small child, and not being able to escape as the three real criteria, I had talked about that at the start of my talk, but then we got to Q&A time at the end, and she stood up to ask a question. But it wasn't a question. She just wanted to say, you forgot something. And I had forgotten to mention that they don't feel like they can escape. And she took a deep breath and said, you forgot to mention this. And the reason I know that is because I'm DID. Wow. This is in front of a room of 50 people.
Wow.
And I was so proud of her. You know, we had a good natter afterwards. We had a good conversation. And I was like, she lit up my heart. The other person who lit up my heart was, I was sitting at the signing table, signing books and stuff. And this woman, she leaned over and she said, I'm not out of the closet yet. And I just went, and you know what? You'll know when you're ready to come out of the closet. You know, you're taking care of yourself. You've told me, I know. And I'm so proud of you for doing that. Those are the conversations that make everything worthwhile, you know?
So there might be somebody, I would say, whether you're listening to your podcast on the train, at home in the evening, whatever, that is in that position. What would your advice be to somebody who's just on that fence of, do I tell people, or is there a starting point as to how you can begin to tell people, or is that very just individual, do you think?
I think it's really individual, because I think that a lot of people don't realize they're multiple until they see a therapist.
Yeah.
And they're actually get a diagnosis. But I think once they understand that this is who they are, you have to tell someone. You have to tell someone. And what I would say is, my best friend, who in the book, her name is Kate. She and I have known each other since early 20s. So we've known each other for decades. And she said to me, when I told her that I was NPD, she said, I knew it. I knew you were a fascinating human being, and that's why I wanted to be your friend. And I'm like, going, you just never know how someone's going to respond. Yes. You know, and they just need to tell someone so that someone else can walk with them. Yeah. You know, they don't need to walk alone.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because the walking for me is quite symbolic, you know, in terms of the pace. This isn't something to suddenly problem solve, and it's about what I've learned from you already in this, that kind of taking your time, being true to your own level of autonomy, being aware of how perhaps other people can shame.
That's exactly right.
Where you've got autonomy around that. And I love that idea. I might steal that, you know, just
go for
it. Taking your time, feeling safe enough, I guess, as well. But
that's exactly right.
That person that stood up in your talk, feeling safe enough to say that in the room.
I know. You know, really, I mean, she's pretty amazing, you know, because I can get up there and I can talk about it. And in many ways, I've got this safety bubble around me because I'm the author, I'm the talker. And, you know, what I say, it's my own opinion, but, you know, hey, I'm doing the talking. But for someone else to just interject and actually pierce that bubble and go, I want to be in that bubble too. I was like, wow, it was wonderful. It was really wonderful.
Kind of. So as you were writing your book, is there anything, obviously there's so much in there, is there anything that really stands out for you that you think, I want someone picking up this book, whether they're reading it or listening to it as an audiobook, to really take away from it? Are there a few kind of nuggets that you think would really resonate with people about your lived experience, how they can support themselves or others?
That's a really good question. Wow, now I have to articulate that. Okay, let's give it a go.
Such a tricky interview.
Well, it's about hope.
Yeah.
But, and I want people, whether they're supporters or survivors or just whatever their circumstances are, to feel that there is hope. Yeah, there's always a new day. But the other side of that is it's not going to necessarily be an easy hope. You know, I worked really hard to writing the end of my book to not just be, you know, roses and flowers and butterflies and all, because it's not.
Which I like.
Life is not that way. But who was I talking to? It was a psychologist. We were talking about this concept of pockets of joy. That, you know, as we walk along in our days, yes, we've still got our trauma to deal with. We've got all this stuff, but we can have pockets of joy. And I guess I want people to go, you know what? Yeah, she went through crap, but look at where she's at now. She's, I've got hope, you know. I'm 63 and I'm living my best life, you know.
Which I love.
Yeah.
That kind of, you know, hope. And because, again, I guess one of the things I've recently kind of thought, you know, when you've had a really long career, is that I've really started to think more about this kind of jump to problem solving. So a lot of books you do read, it's very much do this, do that, do this. And it's kind of missing out, kind of making room to really understand yourself and understand your well-being, your mental health.
I offer no solutions.
That insight is actually, to me, the biggest intervention. I think.
Yeah. There are no answers in my book apart from saying this is what the inside of my head looks like.
Yes.
These are my altars, and this is what I live with, and I hope it inspires you.
That's a powerful thing, isn't it? That inspire. And what do you want to inspire people to do? What is your hope for other people?
My hope for other people is that they're going to see someone on the streets. Oh, this would be my dream. My dream would actually be put you out of a job. I would love to see us not need therapists in this world.
Yeah.
And I know that that's a joke, and that in many ways it'll never happen. But if we could smile at each other a bit more, stop feeling like we have to one up each other and put ourselves first, and be kind. It's this thing. I'm constantly going, can we just be kind to each other, even if it's just a smile, because you have no idea what that other person is going through. And I think the kinder we are to each other, and the more gracious and hospitable we are to each other, the better off this world is going to be. And call me naive, call me, silly, but I'd rather live with that hope than to go, the world is out to get me. I'd rather be positive.
And you know what? There's people don't realize, but there's a big scientific evidence base behind hope as well.
Really? There you go.
Sometimes people think of it as a more woolly, abstract type concept, but actually there's a lot of science behind hope and how it can impact our mental health, our physical health. And as you say, it costs nothing to smile. I was in a coffee shop yesterday and I caught myself. I was in between meetings and I just needed to get something done. I had a couple of emails, but there was someone next to me on their own. And I could tell that they wanted to just say hi. And I run a local community project connecting people. So I thought, do I get these 2 emails done that I really needed to get sent, or make that? And I chose to make that connection and chat.
Oh, well done.
And it is, because it's one of those things, isn't it, where you kind of think, the rest of my day then meant I hadn't done these 2 things, but that's okay. The world is not going to end because I didn't do those 2 things. But for that person, I thought, we're always saying to people, reach out, connect, smile. But if you're then in receipt of someone who isn't able to reciprocate that when they can do, if you're really busy and you haven't got time to stop, that's very different. But I just thought, what might have that signal to that person, and what might it mean next time they want to reach out or reply to someone else? So it's just that little domino effect. So I absolutely love that. So, anyone listen to this podcast now, what can you do today, tomorrow, when you're around other human beings? A smile, it's free. A quick hello.
Exactly.
How you
got
doing? Cheesy conversation. It doesn't have to be heavy stuff, does it?
No.
Making a little observation. So people are going to want to hear more about you. They're going to want to find out more about you, especially people in the UK who may not yet be familiar with your work, and hopefully after this podcast they will be. Where do you hang out? How do we find you?
Okay, my website is maggie-walters.com. And it's very Australian centric. But if you want to get a copy of the book, you can get it on any major online retailers, and go for it. It's out there and ready. And I would love to get emails from people from the other side of the world and see what they think of it. I've gotten some great feedback here in Australia.
Start some conversations.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Because you're also on Instagram as well, aren't you?
Yes, so Instagram, Facebook, not so much. That's more my personal space, but Instagram, I'm very much on Instagram. So
And I always think start conversations, particularly Instagram. I find I use more now to start conversations. We were just talking about this before, weren't we? Reaching out. Take that chance, reach out. So
why
message
not?
Maggie, say
Absolutely.
Hi, tell her what
Please,
you thought
I'd love to hear.
All of this information will be in the show notes. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I want to go find that book, just click on the link and it'll take you straight there. So you don't have to do any extra legwork, and tell us what you think. So email Maggie.
Thank you
me
very
about
much.
The podcast, and share this podcast. That's
Please.
The really important thing. Just don't know who might need to kind of hear this. So you've already given me a load of nuggets of really good information, but my kind of signature move, if there was one thing that you could leave us with, one little bit of inspiration, facts, a little something, what would it be?
Find that pocket of joy and enjoy it.
Yes. Oh, I love the extra bit. Because you might find the joy, but then still be worried about what you're doing next. Enjoy it, feel it.
No, embrace it and own it. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just trying to think, what have I got today where I might have a little pocket of joy to remind myself to lean into it? And because we don't want to tell other people to do it and not do it ourselves as well. Maggie, it's an absolute pleasure meeting you. I've kind of got my little Australian crew now, which is amazing.